probably the single most creative inventor on this planet, and he is what I consider a national asset of inestimable value for what he's already done. So someday the textbooks will be written on what Bedini has really done. It will curl your hair. So that was another great experience, to be able to work all these years with John and actually see things that produced very strange phenomenology electrically on the bench. But see John work out how to make them work. That was the missing ingredient. See, those are other people's discoveries. They are Golden's discoveries, or John Bedini's discoveries, or Floyd Sweet's discovery. I didn't discover any of that. My job was to work with them and then to sincerely do my best to find out what kind of physics would describe at least pretty close to what was going on.
Because they knew they had it, it worked.
They knew it, but they didn't know what the physics was. They had it working, and they had, by trial and error, found out how to make it work. Then the question is, how do you explain it? And my job was to find what kind of physics that thing is using. It's not a simple job, because often you can't do that in 6 weeks. It may take 6 years. But if you stay with it, and if you get enough phenomenology, gradually you start to narrow in the process. You accumulate a lot of references that you finally muddled your way through. You accumulate a lot of things that got actually discovered and parked on the bench nobody did much with, and you find out that's what is being done here. So you get, slowly, you just narrow in to where you have at least a sort of a decent understanding of what's going on. It isn't perfect, but at least you have a proper physics type approach to what's going on. It can be put in very solid physics, for example.
And what's important about that? What's important about knowing how, why, and how?
What's important about knowing something of the real physics of it is this. Many inventors have actually done some remarkable things. Stubblefield was certainly remarkable in what he did. Before Tesla, Tesla got some of his stuff from Stubblefield. And it turned him on to the area. Then Tesla, of course, was a creative genius. But many of the inventors, the physics wasn't born yet, the early inventors that did this, to explain it. The physics wasn't available. So they created their own lexicon, their own terms, their own concepts. And what we have today, there's no way to translate that into physics unless you dig out the physics first. Well, if nobody's ever put together the bits and pieces to make a physics that you could translate to, it never gets translated. It's a chicken or egg situation. So my job was to tackle the chicken or egg situation, so that we wind up with a chicken and an egg. If you do that and you have some physics where you can now start to design, you now start to have a technology that can be built and developed and placed on the market eventually, and actually go out and be used to power homes and things like that. Until you get both some kind of theory that's workable, some kind of theoretical model that understands and fits this experimental phenomenology to help you with your design of then bigger systems, better systems, more stable systems, you're never going to have a technology.
Can't advance.
It can't advance past the early prototype stage or lab bench experiment stage. Those who made it past there, like Ed Gray, went into production on a system. And, of course, they came in and stopped his production line in Los Angeles, or you'd have had Gray systems on the market. So a lot of it was suppressed all the way, and that's very true. T. Henry Moray was absolutely genuine. All his systems were genuine. He had a 50-kilowatt system. But the vested interest came into play. No matter what you like to think, or whether you didn't want to be a conspiracy buff or not, I'm trying to remember the noted writer who said, it's not that there's one conspiracy, there are many, because every big organization's got all kinds of conspiracies going on in it anyway. That's the human situation. That's the 9% that try to manipulate everything. So don't worry about conspiracies. In every big organization, big group, or whatever, including big commercial companies after the Enron scandal, who do we have to convince of that? In every one of those big businesses, you have exactly the thing going on today. Well, people who early on took over power companies and things like that, and the power industry and all, and got the money for it, when you get through all the interlocking corporations, they really don't want to see that change, because that's the golden avenue that pours money into their coffers. It's just a matter of, I don't want to disturb my income.
You have the equivalent of 3 master's degrees.
Well, if you count the military training in Command General Staff College, that's considered the equivalent of a master's degree in military science. And in fact, you can get a formal master's degree there now if you do a thesis. I did a staff study, not a thesis, so I didn't get a formal master's degree, but it's recognized at the master's level in military science. And so I had that, and I had the actual master's degree in nuclear engineering, the equivalent master's degree of a master's degree in aerospace engineering, and lots of missile experience. Lots of missile experience. So that's basically the background. We did go on later one day to acquire a doctorate. It's not a doctorate like you would get if you went to MIT. I got it for life experience. And I did submit a thesis. I did work on a thesis. My thesis was the first, hopefully legitimate, theory of permissible over-unity electrical power systems. And part of it was the first formal correction to Aristotelian logic, so far as I'm aware, that's ever been done. And the production of a 5-law logic, which turns out to agree very well with, well, it helps on latent stuff, but it also agrees very well with, I'm trying to think of the other fellow that did a beautiful work in logic that was very well indeed. It agrees with his logic's output entirely. So we came along the same path, you see, just a different track.
Pythagoras? No.
No, I'll think of it in a moment. But that was really what I had in my thesis. It was a correction to formal Aristotelian logic. You can show easily that all the methods we use to prove the logic symbols, logic theorems in 3-law logic are flawed. And when you correct it, you get a very strange logic. But it does seem to work in the real world. It does have some applications, but very strange, very odd. Yeah. Opposites can be identical because you inject the addition of observation. You don't really have A and not A. You have observed A and observed not A. You have applied a process before you can say you have A. Even in your thought process you have. If you take the process into account, you come up with a different kind of logic. See, Aristotelian logic never took into account the process. The closest thing to anything like that is the beautiful book, Mathematics, Loss of Certainty, that
Morris Klein.
Morris Klein did. And anybody that's interested in logic at all, I would highly recommend read Morris Klein's book.
You said something in the earlier tape from 2000. I played it for my wife, and it just fascinated me, and that is that it's a pretty simple concept, I suppose. We tend to look at everything in 3 dimensions, 3-dimensional space, because our minds exist in space-time.
That's right.
So can we say more?
We are fitted to the photon interaction, which is what generates what we call the 4 space, 3 space that we see. Because when you do observation, you do a partial with respect to t, you tear off the time dimension, you see a flat 3-space snapshot. And you see life like you do it very rapidly. You don't realize you're doing it that rapidly, but you never see the 4th dimension. You always see continuing series of 3-space changes. But each one is an individual snapshot, individual frame in the camera at the moment it's taken. So you see it just like a motion picture. You see this series of frames, very rapid series of frames, and so you infer the motion and the time and all that. But we never experience time directly. We can't see it. I mean, I look every which way I can. I can't see that 4th angle over there in that corner where I've got length, width, and height, but I can't find that time angle sticking off there. I can't see it.
So do you think that there's an analog there with the Zen masters who...
Yes.
Their focus is the now, which becomes...
The Zen master is using 5-law logic. The first problem that you have in Zen is to violate the 3-law Aristotelian logic, which is fitted to photon interaction. That's this ordinary garden variety physical world and, materialistic world. That's all you're getting if you're doing that. You've got to escape past that if you want to get to what he's trying to do. And the first thing he has to do is he has to try to break down that unconscious total lock of this 3-law logic on a person. So most of the Zen method, for example, is devoted to doing that. Look at the dialogues. You'll see a Zen master looking around and saying, I want you to look at this flag on this pole. Is that flag for real? And he'll have a student that says, oh no, the flag exists in my mind, the pole exists in my mind, and the earth under my feet exists in my mind. It's not real at all. Whereupon the Zen master will strike him in the face, knock him down, and he will say very calmly and very politely, was that real? And the fellow will get up and say, I have to admit that was real. And he will say, fine, go continue your studies. You're not quite there yet. And the new student just starting in will see all that, you know, and it's his turn next. And the Zen master turns to him and asks him the same question and says, look around you and look at this flag on this pole. I want to know, is that flag real? And he said, oh, it's absolutely real, absolutely. And the Zen master gets a frown on his face. Says, this fellow hadn't learned anything. Let him continue scrubbing the kitchen and doing his meditation. So you wonder then why? Because the same question, if you took the other answer, that wasn't right either. In other words, he broke up either or, you see. It gave him both and he didn't know about it. But what he's pointing out to him is when you do an either or choice, you've invoked a process. Before you invoke the process, it's not either or. So that turns out to come into play like a Venn diagram that we prove all the logic theorems with. You know, one of the three laws is A is not identical to not A. Well, look at the edge of the block that you draw to represent A. What is the edge? Is it A or is it not A? Not A being outside that block. You can't say it doesn't belong to A because obviously it does. I can touch that anywhere from within A. At the same time, it totally belongs to not A because I can touch it out there. The Aristotelian logic fails. That law, the third law, fails in real life. In physics, you meet this with a difference. Is this a particle or is it a wave? It's not either or, it's both and. It's how we observe it. We can observe it in one fashion as a particle. We can turn right around and observe it as a wave. Now, beyond observation, it's the same thing. But we're incapable of observing it and measuring it that way. But we have to think about it that way. That's what quantum mechanics is all about. So we run into the need for a different logic when we violate the simple photon interaction. Because, you know, the normal physical world like we see. So, and the logic has applications because everywhere you apply higher logic, you can work out new things you can do you couldn't do before. The equations change or have different meaning, richer meaning. Things that became impossible before are now not necessarily impossible anymore. So another thing you'll find is you write the other law, you just write the fourth law, you write as A is identical to not A. And you say, now wait a minute, I've got a law that says A is not identical to not A, and I got one that says A is identical. Are they in conflict? You have to write a law that says how they are not in conflict. You say, that's your fifth law. So you either have a case where they are identical or you have a case where they are not identical. You see, that will be what your perception adds to it. But so you've got to trace the perception because you don't have an abstract A and an abstract not A. You have a thought A and a thought not A. And the old philosophers, not too many of them bothered to separate the idea that A was in fact not really A, not an absolute A. It was a process that made this or perceived or thought this thing A. And how can you have two opposites identical? Simply change the process that is going to do the perceiving or the observing. That's what we do in quantum mechanics. We change the process that does the observing. It's a particle. We change the process a little bit. It's a wave. So it's very useful, you see, because it works in real life. But it doesn't work in common, ordinary life, you see. I mean, there it's very simple. That car either hit you or it didn't. You can forget Schrodinger's cat. You're going to wind up either very dead or hurt, or you're scot-free. So you have to watch at what level you do. But it helps also if you do that kind of work a little bit, because it forces you to start to think with at least, hopefully, some kind of precision, instead of just grabbing a hold of everything and just slopping everything around. You start narrowing it in and say, I really don't understand. Like, we'll say, what is energy? And the professor will say, energy is the capacity to do work. Okay, let's think about that statement. Energy is capacity. No. I can have energy without having any capacity. And it doesn't have to have any work being done to have energy. The fact that I can use energy to do some work is, of course, a fact. It has nothing to do with the definition of energy.
It's an expression of energy.
It's a characteristic that energy can perform. It has nothing to do with its nature. And that's why you'll find Feynman saying, people that do think deeply about this, saying in his 3 volumes, we really don't know what energy is. Today we can come a little closer at least. We can at least tentatively model it as energy alone is a curvature or a distortion of space-time. If you're using the space-time view, a relativistic view. If you want to use particle physics, it's a change in the virtual particle flux of the vacuum. And that's it. They are identically the same thing. But you're looking at them through a different set of glasses in each case. But it works either way you go. But you don't have forces or anything yet when you have the curvature of space-time. Until that interacts on mass, you don't have a force. The beauty of doing things like that is sometimes a tiny, tiny little thing that pops out is of vast importance. We have all been taught that we can only do leaky diode engineering. We got to fight nature tooth and nail. We've been taught that nature's not going to give you anything for free unless you fight for it. When in fact the exact opposite is true. We can have all we want from nature, energy-wise, if we would just ask for it in the right form. But if we fight her, she'll fight us like a tiger. We're forcing the fight on her. But we don't have to do it that way. The other thing is that some folks really don't want us to know is that it makes us realize we think that we have to pay as much energy to engineer forces, force systems, you see. We have to pay for all that energy that went into that huge force. We don't have to pay anything for the energy. We got to pay a little bit for the structuring and the control and the switching. We do not have to pay for the energy. See, that is the point that's been missed. So I can build very powerful forces that aren't doing anything yet by interacting with mass if I first build these energy structures with lots of energy and very well shaped and all like I want those forces to be. If I engineer all this and I pay a little bit for my switching and timing and structuring and all that stuff, but I get it all structured. Then I interact it with mass, and bingo, I got one huge force system just doing gobs of work. You can see both the benefits and the detriments of that. Benefits, you can see how you can do engineering with, instead of you paying for all the energy and brute force it takes to dig up the mountainside and put in a new road. In theory, you can do all of that with just a tiny bit of energy you put in and form the precursor patterns that make the forces and then let the forces and dynamics do it. So it's a different kind of engineering. Weaponry, it means you can build very powerful weapons very simply and then put them into mass, and they are tremendous things. Far more tremendous than you would think of the guy in the laboratory building the structures. So that's what I call precursor engineering, is that it opens up and that's really the secret of Soviet energetics. That's what they did. They discovered what I'm calling precursor engineering. Trying to find some term that connects it right back into our physics, you see. We already know that there's no forces and force fields outside matter. But we don't use it. We haven't corrected our models.
So it's easy to build systems that where one force essentially fights with another.
Everything we do, we fight forces.
And it's easily observable too.
That's right. We pit one force against another. So
we have grown past that.
We've gone past that. If we ever get it developed, and we don't wipe ourselves out and all first, if we'll go ahead and control ourselves a bit so we survive, and if we can apply this for the benefit of humankind, we can do very, very useful things, very needed, seriously needed. And we can do them with remarkable ease after we once develop the technology.
Well, it's almost as if history demands, as we evolve our technologically evolve in particular, we also expand socially. And if we don't kind of toe the line,
That's correct.
then we are in error.
Well, I don't know how much you've read of my early stuff, but we looked early on at what it meant to be an intelligent tool-using species. There are two kinds of intelligence. One is a tool-using species, and the other doesn't have a good tool-using appendage. So, because tool-using means, that's what technology means, tool-using. So, one is the technological species, or going to be, and the other is a non-technological intelligence. The dolphin is a beautiful non-technological intelligence. We're so dumb we can't even interpret what the dolphin's trying to tell us when he's talking to us. John Lilly, for example, his dolphins finally gave up on him and started committing suicide. And he was very saddened because he said, I'm really not intelligent enough to be able to decipher their language or what it is they're really trying to get across to me. And they have given up in frustration. So, by whatever characteristic you set with intelligent, it can be, if you use brain size per body size, the greatest intelligence on the planet is a great blue whale, probably. But we are the technological species because we have a tool-using member. So that means we adapt tools. Intelligence means adaptability. And basically, when you get through all the hooey, that's what it means. And we adapt tools. Well, that's why we eventually could come down out of the trees. The technological species, eventually its tool feet will be faster than any other animal's foot. Its tool teeth will be sharper than any other animal's teeth. And so it will eventually dominate its biosphere by the power of its tools, particularly when it gets gunpowder and muskets and cannons and gets away from darts and bows and arrows and all. And but the problem with that is the behavior. There's two kinds of behavior. Genetic control, hardwired. You don't have to think about the sensations going to occur to you if you burn your skin. It's automatic. Wired in. But if you're going to learn to walk, you're going to have to worry about that. That's not wired in. It is for a little horse, but it's not for you. A little horse right after birth can get up very short and then scamper around. You can't do that as a baby. It's going to be months and months and months and months and months before you even start crawling as a baby. So what it does is we tear out, the intelligent species has to tear out a lot of its checks and balances that a species normally has about its own competition. A less intelligent species may have competition for females, territory, whatever. But when two male deer struggle for dominance, one of them weakens and flees. The other could easily chase him down and kill him, but he doesn't. It doesn't have anything to do with morality. It's a switch it throws. He stomps and snorts and shows females what a fine lad he is and how lucky they are, and that's it. But a human, you see, that check and balance has been torn out, so we have more room for adaptive learning, learned responses rather than hardwired responses, software rather than hardware. So the human is quite often capable and will run him down and kill him or shoot him in the back or whatever. The problem with that is to be a technological tool using intelligence is to carry the seeds of the species destruction as you go. Because as your tools develop more power, you use the tools in your intra-species conflict. You learn to kill people faster and easier. Hitler was just the beginning, you see, in burning the Jews and all that. You get the ability to kill them off en masse. Or Herman Kahn once said something at a conference I attended that was remarkable. You know, he said, it wasn't the fact that there was a mechanism that, if unleashed, would destroy all life on Earth. That didn't bother him. It really didn't bother him very much. What bothered him was that he knew 200 such mechanisms. So, and that's kind of the point. They say to be a technological intelligent species, you are in a time game. Your species will self-destruct unless it learns to adapt. Now, what adapting means, you know, you get that from whatever philosophy you're in. But I think what it means is you've got to outgrow the material. You've got to get into where precursor engineering is and where you're handling the energy direct, right straight with your body functions and your mind functions and all. You become almost like a godlike power.
So cybernetics is an extension of tool building and tool use.
But see, it's a double-edged sword, because the first use we're putting it to is in our conflict. So we're using it against our fellow human before we're using it for benefit. Yes, it could be used for benefit. It could be used for great benefit. But with our usual diplomatic aplomb, we're going to use it first to kill a lot of folks or hurt a lot of folks or inconvenience them and so forth. If you look at the collective human species, unconscious, that we're all part of, that's interesting. Look at a human mind. The conscious is really a sort of a periscope we stick up out of the unconscious and trying to pull it in when we go to sleep and so forth, or when we have coma, or when we get knocked out. But it's really like a periscope, and it's put up to deal with this world that we live in, this physical environment. And you got to give precedence to it, because if you don't, if you sit watching all this massive parallel processor called your unconscious, which is totally conscious, your conscious is a serial processor, one thing at a time, one slide in that projector at a time. The collective unconscious is a massively parallel processor, the unconscious, for example. It's controlling that group of cells right there in my knee. It's controlling this one right here in my skin. At the same time, all that stuff, everything, all at once. If the serial processor, which can only take one slide in a projector at a time, tries to look at the unconscious mind, it sees jillions of slides, just sees black.
Overwhelmed.
So it can't recognize it. If the unconscious wants to communicate with it, it's got to take something that has all these multiple meanings, which is what we call a symbol. It has multiple meanings. Symbolizes. It has to form it symbolically and present that to us in the form of dreams and stuff like that. And that generates Freudian dream analysis, Jungian dream analysis, and so forth. But the collective human unconscious is even worse. If we take a sane human being, it means he's pretty well integrated between his conscious and his unconscious. There's no huge overriding conflicts. If he starts to get some pretty bad conflicts, he becomes what we call neurotic. He's sick. And his behavior changes, erratic. If he becomes insane, he becomes very, very unbalanced. And, we got to put him in an institution or something. We can treat the guy that's neurotic maybe, but the other guy, we got to just stick him in the loony bin and hope that he ever gets treatable. What they really do is they dope him up and keep him very quiet and so forth, and treat him if they can, if he ever gets that way. But the difference between sanity and insanity is dissociation. Severe dissociation is the definition, legal definition of insanity. That means fragmented into pieces, is what dissociation means. Dissociation from being a unified functioning. Well, let's look at the collective human unconscious. That's what a human species is. That's the mind for the whole human species. What's this conscious mind? Yours, mine, everybody's. Are they integrated? No, totally dissociated. Well, you got a little over 6 billion people on Earth, and you got 6 billion dissociated, fragmented, conscious minds. That is about as insane as you can possibly get. I mean, a human being that had multiple personalities, if he was a tremendous case, might have 20, right? But 6 billion and something? Forget it, Charlie. So the collective unconscious, which has an extraordinary power, it can materialize its thoughts and dreams and all, emotional responses, and does. But what it does is, it has all this conflict from large groups of people going into it. So it has tremendous conflict at this because it's insane. Its consciousness is insane. It's severely dissociated. So what's the answer? The answer has got to be some kind of link between the consciousness. We try to do that with morality and laws and things like that, and with balance and all. We try to say you have to have a standard of behavior where you can disagree with a person, but you don't take a knife and cut his throat. That's a no-no. I mean, it's against the law and it's immoral. we have to go from this kind of fragmented prescription. We have to go to something that enforces that directly out of the collective unconscious. That if you make a boo-boo and you raise the knife to kill another human being, all the anger goes like the male deer. We have to have a hardwired response from the collective human unconscious. We don't have anymore. If we don't get something like that, that will control our intra-species conflict, our weapons are so big now, we are going to utterly destroy ourselves, probably the earth along with it.
What would that be?
I think that psychoenergetics is a tool that would let it be engineered if we had time to develop it and wouldn't use it to try to kill one another.
So hardwire modification.
Well, modification of the collective human unconscious to where it now takes over the job of what we're trying to do with law and morality and all that. We're trying to leave people as free as possible for individual performance and enjoyment, but also to group constrain them so there are certain limits of behavior you do not do against the group. That's really what we're trying to do with all the laws and morality and all that stuff like that. That could be done perfectly by the collective human unconscious if we had the responses wired right in there.
How? What's the mechanism of collective unconscious manipulation?
Well, the collective unconscious, when it dreams because of these unresolved conflicts, just like humans do, we apply just standard dream analysis to the collective unconscious with all these conflicts between large groups of people. You can psychoanalyze the phenomenology by what is causing the conflicts, what it's trying to express. Like when the Russians started plotting on how to take over Europe and all this stuff, and wait till we disarm and get new breakthroughs and all this. This means a lot of threat against everybody that's coming out of Russia. Immediately the collective unconscious starts materializing ghost rockets. Rocket had fired everybody's mind, right? It's a phallic symbol, firing its tail, that's a symbol of dominance. Dominant, firing its tail symbol, male phallic symbol, extraordinary. Power and dominance is what it said. You got a plot for power and dominance coming out of Russia. That's what you had going on with the ghost rockets. So you can analyze every big wave and all this for what the collective unconscious is trying to tell you. In the old days, kings used to know something about that in different terminology. And they hired what they call, today we would call soothsayers, but they called wise men. And these guys were chosen because of their ability to interpret the things that happened around the power structure, around the king. These odd, what today we would call paranormal phenomena. They learned how to read it and do what today we would call a dream analysis or psychological analysis. Oftentimes they could tell him who was plotting against him, where they were coming from what direction, and about the time period they were coming. These kings weren't fools. He didn't pay these clowns good gold to get a bunch of junk from them. If they couldn't produce, he just simply cut their heads off. But he paid them good gold when they produced, and so he didn't have any that stayed alive very long if they didn't produce. So that's why he paid them and why he kept them around him, because they were very useful to his survival. But they actually had people do that understood how to do that.
So what you're saying is we have to evolve in or we'll use our tools to kill ourselves.
That's correct. We have to learn to master and overcome our use of the tools to kill each other. And the only way I see to do that, we've tried religion, we've tried ballot, we've tried the bullet, you name it. We've tried this school, this system, that system, whatever you want. And it's the old saying, each one of those works for some of the people some of the time. So we haven't found an answer yet in that way of approaching it. The only way I can see that give you an absolute approach, guaranteed, is hardwired in the collective unconscious. That means you got to build it in there. You got to turn around. If we are insane as a species, we're going to have to treat our own species. You see what I'm talking about? We got to become our own psychiatrists and clinical psychologists for our own species, and we got to put the changes down in there that have to be made. Now the question is, who's going to bail the cat? Who's going to get to do that?